This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
I want you to try a little visualization exercise with me today.
Okay, I'm game.
Picture Denmark. Just close your eyes for a second and, conjure up the most stereotypical, postcard-perfect image of a Danish city you can muster.
I've seen lots of bicycles.
Right, bicycles. And you are probably visualizing a beautifully curated living room, right? Like sleek, minimalist furniture.
Lots of natural wood, for sure.
Exactly. A cobblestone street outside the window filled with people, like effortlessly riding those bicycles in perfectly tailored, weather-appropriate coats.
They always have the best coats.
They really do. And you were definitely picturing those cozy, candlelit evenings, that famous heavily exported concept of hygge.
Right, right.
And let's be honest, you were probably imagining some incredible pastries shared among friends. It all feels intensely warm, very connected. Like very communal.
Yeah, it is a highly seductive image, and it is entirely by design. We have spent decades absorbing that specific cultural export. We basically associate that part of Northern Europe with an incredibly high quality of life, robust social safety nets, and just a deep, almost innate sense of social cohesion.
Yeah, we think of it as this utopia of togetherness.
Exactly. We tend to view it as a society where the collective well-being is heavily prioritized over raw, atomized individualism.
Which is why the number I'm about to share with you feels like such a massive contradiction.
Oh, it really is.
Because there is a hidden, honestly somewhat lonely statistic lurking right behind those beautifully designed, warmly lit apartment windows. And once you see it, it completely shatters that cozy communal illusion.
It changes everything.
It does. In Denmark right now, nearly half, specifically 46% of all households consist of just one single person.
Yeah, 46%.
That's almost half.
When you really pause to visualize what that means practically, it changes the entire landscape of the city.
Right, like imagine walking down the street.
Exactly. Nearly half of the front doors you walk past in a busy Danish city open up to an empty house. Just one person, living entirely alone.
Wow.
With their own kitchen, their own living room, their own isolated routines. And, this isn't just a quirky local anomaly. It places Denmark right at the bleeding edge of a global demographic trend that is fundamentally reshaping how human beings organize themselves.
46%. When I first encountered that number, I actually had to go back and double-check the source material.
I don't blame you.
Because it completely contradicted the narrative we are sold about this region. It feels like this massive architectural and social failure masked by, really good interior design.
That is a great way to put it.
Which is exactly why we are dedicating this deep dive to understanding the mechanics of that isolation. We have our hands on a truly fascinating 2026 sociological study.
It is a brilliant piece of research.
It really is. It is by a researcher named Tulia Jack, and it carries a very academic title. Home Alone. Solo Living Pathways, Everyday Experiences, and Policy Implications for Sharing and Sustainability.
So the mission for our conversation today is to look at the human reality beneath that 46% statistic.
Right. We need to know what's actually happening.
Exactly. We need to explore the specific pathways, like the sequences of events that lead people to sign a lease entirely by themselves.
And spoiler alert,
Yeah.
It is very rarely a deliberate, plotted-out life goal.
No, it's really not. We are also going to examine how the actual day-to-day psychological experience of living alone fractures radically depending on your gender.
That part blew my mind.
It's wild. And finally, we have to connect these deeply personal lifestyle choices to the macro level, because this trend of solo living is secretly driving an environmental crisis that, quite frankly, most climate models are struggling to address.
Okay, let's unpack this. But before we get into the findings, we need to talk about how this researcher actually got her data. Because this isn't just a study of, sterile spreadsheets and census data.
Right. She went deep.
She really did. To get to the bottom of this, Tulia Jack didn't just scrape public housing records. She physically went into people's homes. She conducted in-depth, qualitative interviews with 23 solo dwellers across Denmark.
And it's a huge age range, too.
Massive. We are talking about a massive spectrum of life experience here, from a 27-year-old just trying to establish a career, all the way up to a 90-year-old who has lived through, like, multiple eras of societal and architectural change.
Yeah.
She sat on their couches, looked at their floor plans, and really dug into the specific nuanced reasons they ended up living alone.
And that qualitative methodology is the only way to genuinely understand a phenomenon like this.
Because the numbers just don't tell the whole story.
Exactly. When you restrict yourself to macro-level quantitative data, you only see the symptom. You see the line on the graph going up, showing more single-occupant dwellings.
Right.
But when you sit in someone's living room, drink coffee with them, and ask them to trace the exact timeline of decisions, breakups, job changes, and market pressures that led them to that specific room.
You get the actual story?
You uncover the underlying causality. You move from observing what is happening to diagnosing why and how it is happening. And what emerges from those living room conversations is that our societal assumptions about living alone are, well, often completely backward.
Right, because the cultural narrative we usually apply to living alone is one of, like, fierce, triumphant independence.
Oh, absolutely.
The media loves to portray it as this ultimate marker of adulthood. You picture someone throwing their hat in the air, celebrating the fact that they finally have their own domain.
The Mary Tyler Moore moment.
Exactly. They can leave their shoes wherever they want, eat cereal for dinner, and never have to compromise on the thermostat. It is framed as a victory.
But this study reveals that for millions of people, solo living is not a declaration of independence at all.
Not even a little bit.
It is a byproduct. It is often a total accident of circumstance. People don't march proudly into solo living. They sort of just drift into it when other systems fail.
So this study categorizes these various pathways into solo living, and identifying these groups really helps us understand the systemic failures at play. Let's look at the first group.
Right. The first group the researcher identifies is what she calls the urban transplants. And examining this demographic strips away the illusion of choice almost immediately.
So who are these people?
These are largely highly skilled, career-driven individuals who are required to relocate to new, often expensive cities for employment.
Let's ground this in a real person. The study introduces us to Lena. She's 27 years old, and she moves to a city called Esbjerg for a new job. Now, Lena's ideal scenario did not involve a solo apartment. She actively wanted community. She spent weeks scouring the internet, tapping into social networks, like actively trying to find a roommate or a collective living situation.
Because she wanted to replicate that communal, shared experience she had back in her university days.
Exactly. But she hit a wall. She lacked a pre-existing local network in this new city, and the platforms for finding roommates just failed her. So she defaulted to a solo apartment.
And she didn't celebrate it.
No. She viewed it as a temporary logistical setback.
Lena's situation highlights the friction of modern labor mobility. I mean, our economic systems demand that young professionals be highly mobile, willing to uproot themselves for opportunity.
Right. You go where the job is.
But our social infrastructure doesn't support that mobility. And then you have the purely economic barriers, which are illustrated perfectly by another participant, Eric, who is 34.
Oh man, Eric's story.
Yeah. Eric moved to Copenhagen fully intending to start a flat share. He wanted roommates, but he ran straight into a catastrophic housing shortage.
I am still trying to wrap my head around Eric's story. He described going to apartment viewings in Copenhagen, where there was a queue of 200 people waiting to see a single apartment.
200 people.
Just visualize that for a second. Standing in a stairwell with 199 other desperate people, clutching your paperwork, trying to prove you are worthy of basic shelter.
It's intense.
It's like trying to get front row concert tickets, but the prize is just a roof over your head.
The psychological toll of that kind of scarcity is immense. When the housing market operates under that level of extreme pressure, the luxury of choice completely evaporates.
You just take what you can get.
Exactly. The idea of carefully curating a shared living arrangement, interviewing potential roommates for compatibility, or finding a space designed for multiple independent adults, it just becomes a fantasy.
Yeah.
Eric was forced to take whatever he could get, which ended up being a secondhand contract on an 80-square-meter apartment. And the crucial detail here is that his rental contract strictly prohibited him from inviting housemates to cohabit.
Wait, really?
Yes, he was legally barred from sharing the space.
So the market didn't just fail to provide shared housing. It actively penalized him for trying to create it. It's a structural trap.
It really is.
But, okay, what about people who aren't trapped by the market? Let's look at the people who actually had the communal setup, who lived the dream but then walked away from it.
Right. This brings us to the second group in the study, the age outers. And this is where the psychology gets really fascinating.
Who are the age outers?
Well, they are perhaps the most culturally revealing group in the entire study. These are individuals who successfully navigated the housing market in their youth, lived in vibrant shared collectives, and really enjoyed the benefits of passive social capital.
They had the community.
They had it. But as they aged into their 30s and 40s, the internal calculus shifted.
We have participants like Folk, who is 43, and Nina, who is 36. They spent their 20s in these shared spaces. But Nina specifically talks about hitting a wall where she became, quote, fed up.
Fed up with the friction.
Exactly. The daily negotiations of shared housing like, whose turn is it to buy toilet paper? How long can a mug sit in the sink before it becomes an act of aggression? Who is allowed to play music at 10 p.m.?
All those little things.
Yeah, those things stopped feeling like the fun compromises of youth and started feeling like an unbearable burden. The friction of other people simply outweighed the benefits of company.
And the causality here is deeply intertwined with cultural conditioning. I mean, in Western societies, we have internalized a very rigid, linear timeline for adulthood.
Right.
Shared living is culturally coded as an acceptable, even necessary phase for young adults and university students. It is viewed as a stepping stone.
Like it's just a phase.
Exactly. But as you progress chronologically, the societal metric for success fundamentally changes. The acquisition of private, exclusive space becomes the primary indicator that you are a functioning, successful adult.
It feels exactly like outgrowing a favorite punk rock t-shirt from high school.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Like, you loved that shirt, it defined your identity for a specific era of your life, but one day you put it on, and it just feels completely incongruous with who you are. It doesn't fit the current version of yourself.
Yeah, you feel silly wearing it.
Right. So I found myself wondering, is there some bizarre, invisible societal clock ticking in the background that dictates this? Why is sharing a fridge at 25 seen as cool and bohemian, but sharing that exact same fridge at 40 is quietly judged as a failure to launch?
That analogy perfectly captures the subtle coercion of cultural norms. Even if an individual genuinely enjoys the collective lifestyle, the persistent background hum of societal pressure whispers that they should want their own place.
Should being the key word.
Exactly. If you are 40 and still negotiating dish duty with a roommate, society implies you haven't accumulated enough capital or status to buy your way out of that friction. Consequently, people like Folk and Nina essentially age out of the narrow cultural window where sharing is deemed acceptable. They drift into solo apartments, not necessarily because they crave isolation, but because they were following the path of least cultural resistance.
And the tragedy is, they often leave behind a sense of community that they later realize they deeply miss.
They absolutely do.
Okay, so you follow that timeline to its absolute logical conclusion, past the 30s and 40s, and you inevitably hit the third group, the empty nesters.
Right.
And this is where you see the long-term architectural remnants of the nuclear family model. You have participants like Val, who is 90 years old.
90.
She has lived in the exact same house for decades. She raised her daughters in those rooms. She lived there through 2 consecutive husbands, outliving both of them. And now she is a solitary figure navigating a physical footprint designed for a bustling family of 4 or 5.
The spatial mismatch is striking. And then you have Chris, who is 56. His pathway into solo living highlights a very different dynamic within the empty nester category.
Oh yeah, Chris.
When his adult sons reached an age where he felt they should be independent, he actually utilized his financial resources to buy them an apartment, effectively facilitating their exit from the family home.
He essentially paid to get his house back.
He subsidized his own isolation, yes. It left him alone in a nearly 100 square meter apartment. What differentiates the empty nesters from the younger cohorts is the profound hegemony of the nuclear family norm.
Meaning what exactly?
For this generation, the single-family home was the ultimate destination. Once the family unit dissolves, whether through children moving out or spouses passing away, remaining alone in that original family structure is simply assumed to be the only natural, inevitable outcome.
They don't even look for alternatives. The study notes that senior co-housing or downsizing into a shared community isn't even on their radar.
No, not
The house is the container for their memories, even if the container is now mostly empty space.
Exactly. The physical environment remains static while the social environment collapses around them.
Okay, so we have mapped out three distinct pathways, and they all share that accidental or drift quality.
Right.
The urban transplants are forced into it by a broken market. The age-outers are pushed into it by rigid cultural expectations of adulthood. And the empty nesters are simply left there by the inevitable passage of time and shifting family dynamics.
But the study does identify a fourth group, and they are the crucial exception to this rule. The researcher calls them the solitude seekers.
And we really need to highlight them.
We do. This is the demographic that requires us to tread carefully and avoid broad generalizations. The solitude seekers are individuals who actively, deliberately, and fiercely choose to live alone.
It's not an accident for them.
No, for them, solo living is not a compromise. It is an intentional destination.
Take Ella, who is 34. She mentioned that she briefly considered finding a collective in Copenhagen, but when she managed to secure a place she could afford on her own, her relief was palpable.
Oh, she was thrilled.
She phrased it in a way that I found incredibly profound. She said she moved in with herself.
That's a great line.
Isn't it? She explicitly stated that she actively avoids other people's, quote, energies. She possesses a deep, fundamental need to control her sensory and emotional environment.
And Ella's desire to control her environment touches on a critical subdemographic within the solitude seekers, individuals managing mental health diagnoses.
Right.
The study makes a vital point here. For several participants, living alone wasn't just a lifestyle preference or an introverted quirk. It was a non-negotiable medical necessity.
They needed that space.
They required absolute control over their physical space to manage their symptoms, to regulate their nervous systems, and to avoid the unpredictable, often chaotic stress of navigating relationships and shared living spaces on a daily basis.
I'm really glad the researcher included that, because it prevents us from prescribing a one-size-fits-all solution. You can't just mandate that everyone live in a commune, because for some people, that environment is actively harmful.
Exactly.
But looking at the entirety of these four groups, the grand takeaway is the sheer irony of the situation.
The irony is huge.
Outside of those specific solitude seekers, almost everyone else the researcher interviewed is actually quite open to the concept of sharing.
Right, they aren't inherently opposed to it.
They carry fond memories of past roommates, or they express a willingness to try community living again under the right idealized circumstances. But the physical infrastructure of our cities, like those 200-person rental queues and the invisible cultural norms, constantly, relentlessly push them toward isolation.
We have engineered a society where the systemic default is separation. You have to fight incredibly hard to share space. But isolating yourself is the path of least resistance.
This is backwards.
It is, which brings us to the next vital phase of the study. Once the market and the culture have successfully pushed you into a solo apartment and you close that door behind you at the end of the day, what is the actual lived psychological experience of being there?
And this is where the study takes a brilliant, totally unexpected turn. Because you would think the experience of living alone is relatively universal. I mean, silence is silence, right?
You would think so.
But it turns out the way people interpret that silence is heavily, profoundly dependent on their gender.
The disparity between the male and female experience of solo living in the study is immense. And what makes this finding so compelling is that the disparity began to reveal itself before the researcher even conducted a single formal interview.
Yes.
The very process of finding people to talk to became a crucial piece of data.
I love when the methodology becomes the story. So the researcher is trying to recruit solo dwellers for these interviews, and she runs into a bizarre wall.
Huge wall.
The women she contacted were incredibly enthusiastic. They were responding to emails immediately, spontaneously inviting her into their homes, offering to make her tea, and were completely ready to open up and analyze their domestic lives.
Right, very open.
The men, however, were virtually impossible to pin down. She was sending emails, texting, sliding into Facebook DMs, and these guys were just constantly aggressively ghosting her.
And that systemic reluctance of the male demographic to even acknowledge, let alone discuss, their living situation is highly indicative of the underlying psychology at play. They viewed the topic as inherently threatening or shameful.
It peaked with one guy who literally sent her a text message declining the interview. He wrote that he couldn't promise he had the courage to participate because he felt, quote, uneasy about all that is social.
Wow.
And then he just vanished. He completely ghosted the researcher.
That single text message is a perfect encapsulation of the male experience we will discuss in a moment. But to understand the contrast, we first have to look at the female experience. The study defines the female pathway into solo living almost universally through the lens of emancipation.
Emancipation. For the women in this study,
Mhm.
across the age spectrum, closing that door on an empty apartment was viewed as a source of profound pride and empowerment.
It was a victory.
You have the younger women who explicitly value the freedom from traditional, lingering expectations of motherhood and domesticity. But it's the older women whose stories carry the most weight. You have participants like 78-year-old Gertrude or 54-year-old Susan, who clearly articulated that they chose solo living specifically to escape what sociologists call the second shift.
And we really need to unpack the mechanics of that second shift because it is the primary causal mechanism driving this wave of female emancipation.
Let's do it.
Even in ostensibly progressive egalitarian societies, heterosexual relationships still suffer from a deeply entrenched, unequal division of domestic and emotional labor.
Right.
The paradigm is that women work a full day at their formal, paid job, which is the first shift. Then they return home to begin the second shift. The ceaseless, invisible labor of cooking, cleaning, managing the household calendar, tracking when the kids need dental appointments.
The mental load.
Exactly, the mental load. And doing the emotional heavy lifting of regulating a partner's mood and well-being.
I want you, the listener, to really think about your own household right now. If you rigorously tracked every single minute spent organizing schedules, noticing that the milk is low, or buying toilet paper over a month, how equal is it really?
It's usually not.
The data in the study puts a hard number on this. Remember, we are talking about Denmark here. Denmark is globally recognized as a utopian egalitarian society. They are second only to Sweden in the entire EU for narrowing the gender gap.
Very progressive.
Yet, even in Denmark, women still perform nearly an hour more of household labor a day than men. An extra hour every single day.
When you aggregate that, it becomes staggering.
It really does.
An hour a day translates to over 15 full 24-hour days of extra, unpaid, entirely invisible work every single year. Over a 30-year marriage, that is an oceanic amount of stolen time.
Exactly. So when an older woman who has lived through decades of that unbalanced dynamic finally gets the keys to her own space, she isn't just acquiring real estate. She is escaping a systemic, exhausting burden.
She is buying her time back.
Susan specifically discussed her choice not to move in with her current long-term partner. She had previously spent years caring for a deeply depressed ex-partner, and she simply refused to surrender her sanctuary again.
I don't blame her.
She loves her current partner, but she needs the physical boundary to ensure she isn't quietly conscripted back into the role of caretaker.
There is a quote from Liv, a 62-year-old participant, that synthesizes this perfectly. She divorced her husband after their children moved out and purchased her own apartment. When reflecting on her marriage, she told the researcher, "I was free when I lived with him, but not free enough."
Not free enough. That is such a haunting, precise way to describe it.
It is incredibly precise. It implies that she wasn't necessarily facing active oppression or overt hostility in the marriage. Rather, it was the subtle, constant, ambient demands of cohabitation.
Right, the daily grind.
Yeah, the daily compromises, the quiet, unspoken expectation that she would manage the domestic sphere that acted as a low-level, permanent tether on her autonomy. Choosing to live alone physically severs that tether. It redefines the home. For these women, the physical structure transforms from a site of obligated labor into a genuine sanctuary.
But if we pivot our focus to the men in the study, the picture doesn't just change. It completely flips upside down.
It's night and day.
If the women view solo living as a hard-won sanctuary, the men view it as a waiting room. It is experienced as a temporary and, frankly, deeply embarrassing period of limbo.
The psychological contrast is stark, and again, it is rooted in societal expectations. Just as women are culturally conditioned to be caretakers, men are heavily conditioned by the expectation that successful masculinity is intrinsically tied to the role of provider.
The man of the house.
Right. The cultural script dictates that a successful man establishes, leads, and provides for a family unit. When a man finds himself living alone, particularly in middle age, he often internalizes that isolation not as freedom, but as a failure to achieve that fundamental societal benchmark.
Which brings us to the tragic story of Peter.
Poor Peter.
Peter is 57 years old. 3 decades ago, when he was in his late 20s, he bought a massive 120 square meter apartment. That is a huge amount of space for one person in a European city.
Very huge.
And he bought it with the explicit assumption that eventually a wife and children would materialize to fill those rooms. He actually admitted to the researcher that he viewed all that extra square footage as a literal bargaining chip.
The commodification of his living space is heartbreaking.
It really is. He thought he could use the real estate to lure a future partner. He imagined having conversations with a hypothetical woman where he would say, look, you can redecorate everything, you can change the curtains, as long as we live in this apartment together.
He was trying to buy a life script.
He utilized his purchasing power to lay bait for a life he felt he was supposed to be living. And the reality of his situation is that now, 30 years later, he is still sitting in that same echoing apartment, completely alone.
Still waiting.
Still waiting. He told the researcher that he has a full life, that he has hobbies and friends, but he expressed this lingering, palpable melancholy about those empty rooms. He said, I'm sure that if life had turned out differently, that would also have been fun. His entire experience of his home is defined by the ghost of a family that never actually arrived.
The contrast here is just wild to me. You have women who are actively choosing to downsize, renting much smaller places, shedding square footage to maximize their present daily freedom. They want less space to manage.
Less to clean.
Exactly. And on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, you have men who are buying these massive houses, locking themselves into huge mortgages and heating bills, burdened by empty space, all as bait for a future that might never happen.
It perfectly illustrates how our physical housing choices are inextricably linked to gendered societal expectations. Women are actively buying back their time and autonomy. Men are desperately trying to buy a societal ideal.
Spot on.
And this psychological reality brings us to a crucial intersection in the study. Because whether your solo apartment is a sanctuary where you finally don't have to clean up someone else's mess, or a melancholic waiting room where you're hoping someone will eventually walk through the door, living alone is quietly wreaking havoc on two massive external systems: your social safety net and the planet.
That's where the study gets really macro.
But I am struggling with something here, though. If these people, especially the women and the younger professionals, are so capable and independent, shouldn't they be thriving socially? Why does the study suggest they're actually more vulnerable? Let's talk about this concept of passive social capital.
It's a great question, and it comes down to the mechanics of how human beings actually build networks. Social capital, in broad sociological terms, refers to the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively.
That's who you know.
Right. It's the practical value of your social connections. Passive social capital is a very specific type of connection. It is the network you accumulate simply by existing in a shared physical space without having to actively work for it.
It's the low-effort ambient community. If you live with roommates or a partner or even in a highly communicative apartment building, you have passive social capital built right into your daily routine.
You don't even have to try.
Exactly. You have someone to water your plants when you go on a work trip. You have someone who can grab the other end of a heavy couch when you need to move it. You have someone who will just casually say good morning to you while you're making coffee, which kind of grounds you for the day.
Yeah.
You don't have to schedule an appointment for that interaction. It just organically happens.
Precisely. It is frictionless community. But when you live alone, that passive accumulation drops to absolute zero. Solo dwellers have to actively, intentionally hustle for every single ounce of social capital they get. They have to deliberately schedule phone calls, painstakingly plan dinners weeks in advance, and organize outings. If a solo dweller does not actively output energy to maintain their network, the network simply withers and disappears.
And what happens when they hit a wall and actually need something practical? This was one of the most striking dystopian details to me.
I know what you're going to say.
The researcher asked the participants, if you needed help with a practical task, say you broke your arm and needed help assembling furniture, who'd you call? And many of them bluntly admitted they wouldn't call a friend at all. They would just hire a gig worker.
Yeah.
They literally said things like, we can always just get somebody from Uber or a task app to help us.
We can call it the Uber Friends phenomenon. It is the complete commodification of community. And while it functions adequately if you possess the disposable income to pay for it, it reveals a profound, brittle fragility in the social safety net of the solo dweller.
Because what if you don't have the money?
Exactly. If your solution to a broken arm or a period of severe depression or a physical crisis requires a credit card rather than a community bond, your resilience in a crisis is significantly diminished. You have outsourced your neighborhood to a tech platform.
You are paying a premium to avoid the vulnerability of asking for help. But okay, that is the social cost, the isolation, and the fragile safety net.
Yeah.
Let's pivot to the planetary cost, because this is where the study's numbers get genuinely terrifying.
Oh, the numbers are grim.
If living alone is a slow bleed on your social capital, it is an absolute, immediate disaster for the climate.
The environmental implications are arguably the most urgent and quantifiable finding in this entire body of research. We need to look closely at the hard thermodynamic numbers. The average solo dweller in this Danish study had a carbon footprint of 13 tons of CO2 equivalent per year.
13 tons. And to put that in context for you, the Danish national average is 9 tons.
Right.
So simply by choosing to live alone, your carbon footprint instantly skyrockets by 4 entire tons. That is a massive jump. But wait, I have to challenge this premise. Aren't solo apartments usually smaller? How can one person in a small apartment emit more carbon than a family of 4 in a house?
It is a common misconception, but it comes down to baseline infrastructure and the sheer physics of heating space. To understand why the numbers are so high, we have to examine the physical reality of the spare room problem.
Okay, lay it on me.
Remember, Tulia Jack was conducting these interviews inside the participants' living spaces, and as she toured these homes, she consistently found them full of empty, unused, heavily conditioned space.
We are talking about Peter's 120 square meter waiting room, rooms that sit empty for decades.
Exactly. Or the empty nesters who remain in sprawling four-bedroom houses long after the children have left. That unused space isn't just an aesthetic tragedy of loneliness, it is an active environmental sinkhole.
Because you still have to build it.
Right, those empty rooms still had to be constructed, which requires incredibly carbon-intensive materials like concrete and steel. They still have to be maintained. And crucially, in a northern European climate like Denmark's, the entire building envelope still has to be heated through long, dark, freezing winters.
Oh, wow.
You are literally burning fossil fuels to keep an empty room at 72 degrees for nobody.
For nobody. And it's not just the empty rooms. It's the massive duplication of basic survival infrastructure.
Huh.
Think about a house with 5 people in it. Those 5 people share one refrigerator. They share one washing machine, one Wi-Fi router, one oven, one central heating system.
The efficiency is built in.
Right? If those same 5 people decide they all need their own space and move into 5 separate solo apartments, you suddenly have to manufacture, transport, and power 5 refrigerators, 5 washing machines, 5 heating systems. Every single solo dweller requires their own complete resource-intensive set of appliances.
The economies of scale completely disintegrate. This is why the study mathematically notes that single householders have double the average per capita carbon footprint of individuals living in households with 5 or more people.
Double.
It is inherently inefficient. And when you pull back and remember that 46% of Danish households are solo dwellers, you begin to see how this demographic trend is fundamentally, aggressively incompatible with global climate mitigation goals.
It's a huge problem.
We are desperately trying to reduce aggregate emissions, but our deeply ingrained housing patterns are aggressively driving them up.
So if I am tracking the logic of this trap correctly, living alone is a climate disaster because of the duplicated carbon footprint.
Yes.
But as we learned vividly from the women fleeing the second shift, living together often causes extreme mental friction and traps people in unequal domestic labor.
Also, yes.
So are we just completely stuck? Is the modern condition just choosing between a planetary meltdown on one hand and having bad roommates who refuse to do their fair share of the dishes on the other?
It is the central tension of the modern housing dilemma. How do we balance individual autonomy with collective survival? Fortunately, the study doesn't just diagnose the disease and leave us stranded.
Oh, thank goodness.
It transitions into examining the future, asking exactly that question. How do we engineer a way to solve the friction of sharing while simultaneously saving the planet? And the proposed solutions depend heavily on who you ask and specifically what generation they belong to.
Right, because the researcher actually asked the participants to imagine their ideal future living situations. And there was a massive generational divide.
A huge divide.
The older property owners, the ones who are already established and comfortable like Liv, who fought so hard to escape her marriage and win her freedom, or Chris, sitting in his giant, quiet apartment, they overwhelmingly want to age in place.
They do not want to move.
They have absolutely zero interest in rolling the dice on roommates again. They want to stay right where they are, in control of their environment, And when they inevitably get too old to manage the physical upkeep of the house, they expect the local municipality to step in and provide professional care.
They view institutional municipal assistance as their ultimate, reliable safety net. They highly prefer formalized, state-funded help over relinquishing their hard-won daily independence to the unpredictable dynamics of a shared living arrangement.
Which makes sense for them.
It does, but if you look at the younger renters, the urban transplants who were forced into solo living by the brutal housing market, they possess wildly different, incredibly romantic visions of how the future could look.
I am absolutely obsessed with Sky's vision. She is 36 years old. She told the researcher about her dream of starting an all-cola.
Which translates roughly to an elder collective.
Yes. She and her high school friends sit around and talk about pooling all their money when they get older and buying a massive multi-story building together. And the architectural setup is the key to making it work. Everyone gets their own private, locked room, so you still have that crucial sanctuary to retreat to when you are overstimulated.
You still have your own door.
Exactly. But the rest of the building is composed of shared communal areas. Sky was dreaming about having a shared jewelry-making studio, a massive communal kitchen, and even a cafe on the ground floor just for the residents.
It sounds like an absolute utopia.
It really does.
It is a beautiful vision because it theoretically addresses both sides of our dilemma. By maintaining private rooms, it provides the spatial boundaries necessary to avoid the exhausting friction of the second shift.
Right.
But by incorporating shared infrastructure, it pools resources, drastically lowers the per capita carbon footprint, and naturally generates that passive social capital we were talking about earlier. You don't have to schedule a coffee date. You just walk down to the communal kitchen.
That's perfect.
But, as the study rigidly points out, an ollie-call is incredibly, prohibitively difficult to achieve in current reality.
Why is that?
The structural barriers are immense. Zoning laws often prohibit multifamily dwellings in certain areas. Banks hesitate to finance mortgages for groups of unrelated adults. The availability of appropriate buildings is practically zero.
Which is exactly why the researcher doesn't just leave it at romantic utopian dreams. She understands the barriers. So she proposes a concrete, actionable policy framework to make Sky's dream a reality for everyone. She calls it the SHARE framework.
The SHARE framework.
And rather than just reading it like a textbook, let's actually debate how this would work in the real world, because some of these ideas are pretty radical.
Let's start with the foundation, the structural and financial barriers. Right now, our entire legal and financial apparatus is streamlined to easily process single-family homes or single-occupant apartments. If you want a mortgage for a suburban house, the bank knows exactly how to underwrite it. But if 5 friends want to buy a building together, the system short-circuits. The framework suggests we urgently need governments to provide actual financial incentives, tax breaks, and regulatory flexibility for co-living projects.
We have to make building an ollie-collie as legally and financially frictionless as building a traditional condo.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Subsidize the behavior you want. But the framework also addresses the existing housing stock, specifically dealing with those empty rooms we talked about. The study suggests giving tax incentives to homeowners to rent out their spare rooms. Make it financially irresistible for someone like Peter to take in a lodger.
Right.
But there is another idea mentioned here that I have to push back on. The researcher mentions the possibility of capping the number of rooms per person in public housing. That sounds incredibly authoritarian. How on earth do they justify telling someone they have too many rooms and forcing them to move?
It is undeniably a controversial, politically explosive potential intervention. But you have to look at the math. If we acknowledge that severe underoccupancy is a massive driving factor in both the housing crisis, remember Eric's 200-person queue,
Right, thank you.
and skyrocketing carbon emissions, then allowing individuals to hoard empty heated space in state-subsidized housing becomes fundamentally unsustainable. Capping room-to-person ratios forces a more efficient, equitable distribution of the existing built environment.
I see.
The argument is that we don't necessarily need to pour millions of tons of concrete to build new units if we properly, efficiently utilize the bedrooms that are currently sitting empty, being heated for no one. It prioritizes collective survival over individual spatial luxury.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but I see the brutal logic of it. But none of this works if people still view roommates as a sign of failure. The framework talks about the need to advance cultural acceptance.
This loops right back to our punk rock t-shirt analogy.
Yes. We have to fundamentally change the cultural narrative around aging and housing. We need massive public awareness campaigns,
Mhm.
maybe better matching platforms that make sharing culturally normal and prestigious at any age. We need to stop viewing a 45-year-old with housemates as someone who hasn't grown up and start viewing them as someone participating in a highly efficient, socially connected, climate-friendly lifestyle.
We have to recode shared living from a symptom of poverty to a marker of civic responsibility. But that cultural shift leads directly into what I would argue is the most crucial, insightful, and challenging component of the entire framework: the absolute necessity of rebalancing gender roles.
Yes. When I first read this section, it completely reframed how I view environmentalism.
The researcher makes a profound, undeniable connection. Dismantling traditional gender stereotypes and fighting for truly equal parental leave and domestic labor is not just a social justice issue. It is, fundamentally, housing policy. And by extension, it is climate policy.
Let's really spell this out, because it is the linchpin of the whole study. The older women in this research are actively choosing the high-carbon, socially isolating path of living alone, specifically because living with men means doing more unpaid labor.
They are fleeing the second shift.
Therefore, if your goal is to reduce carbon emissions by getting people to share homes again, you cannot just build nicer, more energy-efficient shared buildings. The architecture isn't the problem. You actually have to ensure that the men living in those buildings are going to do half the dishes, manage half the mental load, and take on half the emotional labor.
Precisely. The macro-level planetary climate crisis is directly, inextricably linked to the micro-level dynamics of the kitchen sink. If society does not fundamentally rebalance gender roles, if we do not ensure a truly equitable division of domestic and emotional labor, women will continue to opt out of cohabitation.
They'll just say no.
They will rationally choose the 13-ton carbon footprint over the invisible, exhausting burden of caregiving. Therefore, pushing for aggressive gender equality in the domestic sphere is an essential, non-negotiable climate mitigation strategy. You cannot solve the carbon footprint of housing without solving the gender divide.
It connects everything perfectly. It proves that you can't separate social issues from environmental ones.
Okay.
And finally, the framework includes a safety valve, ensuring inclusivity.
Very important.
It means we have to design all of these incentives and changes without punishing the solitude seekers. The people like Ella who genuinely medically must live alone for their mental health, or just out of a deep personal need for sensory control, shouldn't be penalized, taxed heavily, or stigmatized. We need a flexible system that highly encourages and subsidizes sharing for the majority, without coercing the vulnerable minority.
It requires a highly nuanced policy approach. We must recognize that while sharing is the optimal systemic goal for society and the planet, forced cohabitation can be deeply harmful to specific individuals. The goal is to make sharing the easiest, most attractive option, not a punitive mandate.
Looking at this whole framework, it reminds me of how progressive cities handle transportation. Think about trying to get an entire population to stop driving cars and start riding bicycles to save the environment.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You can't just stand on the sidewalk and yell at people to get on a bike if the only route to work is a dangerous, terrifying 8-lane highway. People aren't stupid. They're going to stay in the safety of their metal boxes.
Of course they are.
If you actually want them to bike, you have to physically build the bike lanes.
Hmm.
You have to change the concrete infrastructure to make the desired behavior the easiest, safest, and most pleasant option. Right now, for modern housing, the 8-lane highway is living alone. It is the only safe route. The SHARE framework is the blueprint for building the social, financial, and physical bike lanes for shared living.
That is an exceptionally accurate analogy. We have spent decades and trillions of dollars building an infrastructure, both physical in terms of single-family zoning and cultural in terms of the nuclear family ideal, that heavily subsidizes and encourages isolation.
We built the highway.
We did. Reversing that massive trend requires highly intentional design. We have to build environments where shared living isn't viewed as a stressful compromise, a marker of delayed adulthood, or an exhausting second shift, but rather as an attractive, effortless, and joyful default.
Okay, let's pull all these massive threads together. We've covered an immense amount of ground today. What we are seeing in Denmark, and remember, Denmark is just the bleeding edge of a trend that is sweeping across the globe, is a staggering rise in solo living.
A massive rise.
It is being driven by people moving across the country for careers. It is driven by an aging demographic left alone in sprawling houses. And profoundly, it is driven by a desperate desire, particularly among women, to escape the unequal burdens of domestic life.
But the costs of this shift toward hyper-individualism are largely hidden, and they are incredibly severe. On a micro individual level, it often leads to a complete collapse in passive social capital and a painful increase in loneliness. The waiting room effect we saw so clearly with the male participants.
Right.
And on a macro planetary scale, the sheer inefficient duplication of resources and the constant burning of fossil fuels to heat underoccupied spaces is resulting in a massive, fundamentally unsustainable carbon footprint.
We are attempting to solve the friction and exhaustion of modern life by retreating into our own isolated corners, locking the door behind us. But those empty corners are literally costing us the Earth.
The solution cannot be found in simply asking people to tolerate bad living situations. It lies in radically reimagining our infrastructure. It lies in pursuing alternative models like the Ollie and implementing comprehensive frameworks that address the root causes, like the severe housing shortage and the deeply ingrained gender division of labor, in order to make community living viable, equitable, and highly attractive across the entire human lifespan.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. Take a moment and really think about the physical space you are living in right now. Look around your room. Look at your kitchen. How much of your intense desire for your own space, your need to have a door you can lock against the rest of the world, is actually just a rational reaction to how exhausting our current poorly designed social environments are?
It's a great question.
If you knew with absolute ironclad certainty that the dishes would always be done fairly, that the invisible emotional labor of the household would be split right down the middle, and that you still had a private, quiet retreat when you needed to recharge your batteries, well, who would you invite to live in your spare room tomorrow?
It is a question that challenges the entire paradigm of how we view the purpose of our homes.
It really does. It makes you look at those glowing, solitary windows in Denmark, and maybe your own empty guest room down the hall a little differently. We aren't naturally hermits. We just haven't built the right kind of community yet. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.